Hello YouTube, welcome back. On every trip I do to the Northern Rivers, I allow myself one treat, and I generally do that on a day when it's too rainy to do anything much with the farm. I've shown you bits and pieces of the Northern Rivers and one or two cafes. My favourite one's the Doma in Federal, but there's another one here on the old Pacific Highway. This is the really old Pacific Highway. Most of the Pacific Highway stretches between Sydney and the Queensland border have been renamed to ways, like the Hinterland Way and the Big River Way. But there's a tiny little detour off the Hinterland Way that's still called the old Pacific Highway. And on that, you will find a place called the Harvest Deli. And the Harvest Deli is on a strip of cutesy shops that are absolutely tourist bait. But the Harvest Deli has some of the nicest sourdough bread and some of the most expensive that you can possibly buy. It also has a lovely cafe where you can pick yourself up a lovely ham and cheese croissant and a very competent cup of coffee. Down the side of the cafe, particularly when it's sunny, you can sit in a beautiful decorative garden, sip your coffee, have your breakfast and enjoy all that's going on. And you can even attend a sourdough baking course. So I'm going to go in for mine now. And it's kind of hard to imagine a nicer setting in which you could have your breakfast. Smells and looks beautiful. Back with you in a minute. Now, before I leave this idyllic garden, I just want to show you something. Thanks to the owners of the Harvest. This mailbox looking thing is actually a beehive, and it's the native Australian stingless bees. They're not like what you would normally expect bees to be like. There's one hole in which they come into and out of the hive. They almost look like flying ants, and you need to look very closely to get a view of them at all. They're not going to sting you. They're tiny little bees, and one of their best attributes is they're completely immune to the varroa mite, which has swept the world and affected beehives everywhere. These little fellas are black, small. They don't travel very far, but they are used by some macadamia farms to pollinate macadamia flowers. And in fact, prior to European settlement of Australia, these little creatures would have been the pollinators for macadamias because they're native to the area and they're the right size to really get into those macadamia flowers. So their one downside is they don't really travel very far. So if you're having native bees on your hive, or you're planning to, you do need a lot of these boxes. There's a place in Nashua that will sell you a box full of bees, but at $500 a pop. It isn't a cheap hobby to have. I'm thinking of getting one just as a hobby for my sort of kitchen garden. But yeah, putting them all throughout the orchard, a little bit too rich for my blood. But thought you might be interested. So without much doing on the farm itself, I thought I'd show you the results of my soil analysis that we looked at in the last episode of the Macadamia Show with Mark Duncan. Now, we took samples from 3 different blocks 1, 3 and 6 in the orchard, and you can watch us doing exactly that. And the results are now back in, and what's happened is that Mark's formatted those results in a way that suits his particular agronomy prescriptions, and he's given me a breakdown of those results. And what I'm going to show you is the summary page, which has the sort of line bar graphs on each of them, which gives you some idea of, just at a glance, whether you're okay or whether you need some serious nutritional work. So, zooming in on block 1 to start with, here are our list of nutrients and how we are going with each of them. And you can see straight away that the soil pH has a red bar. So red is sort of means in a danger zone. In this particular case, the pH is 6.6, and according to Mark's ideal, it should be, between 5 and 6.5. I'm okay with it being 6.6, and in fact, my neighbour Peter Fraser is happy with it being 7, which is exactly neutral soil. We've got other stats that are quite important as well. It's quite low on one form of nitrogen, which is nitrate nitrogen. That's the more immediately available nitrogen, but the longer term nitrogen, the ammonium nitrogen, is okay and in the range. What does that mean? Well, I definitely like some more nitrogen, which you'll get from manure and those sorts of fertilisers. But in general terms, in long-term terms, it's okay. The potassium's actually reasonably high in this block, and you'll see with the other blocks soon that that's not universally the case. Sulphur's a little bit low, but you're going to get that from manure as well, so I'm not too worried about it. All the other basic minerals, calcium, magnesium, sodium, you don't worry about much, is fine. You see figures for aluminium in there, and aluminium isn't good. I mean, it's something that you try to keep as low as possible because it's in fact toxic to the plant, and in acid soils it becomes more available, so you have to watch out for it. The cation exchange capacity, that's an important stat, is running at 17 in this particular block, and we have all some basic nitrogen minerals like copper, zinc, manganese, all within normal limits. So those light blue lines are really signs that things are going okay, and it can kind of explain why the performance in block 1 is actually quite good. Contrast that with block 3. Now, block 3 was taken as a representative of my older blocks, and here we have a pH that's moved from 5.1 on the last test to 5.4. So all that lime that, if you're a long-term watcher, you saw the lime getting spread in the orchard, all that lime has shifted the pH finally from 5.1 through to 5.4. But there's still some work to do, definitely. It's not really in the perfect range for me yet. I'd want it to be much closer to 6, but there you are. Now, it's lacking short-term nitrogen, and I think that's because those big trees really hoover it up. And again, you can correct that with manure. It's got an excess of phosphorus, and I still don't really know why, but the phosphorus is fairly locked up, so it's something I've been told not to worry about. Potassium's low, and I do worry about that, or one form of potassium is low. We do need some more potassium in there in order for flowering to be decent. Sulphur's on the high side as well. So there's a mishmash of funny results there, and look, magnesium's surprisingly low on this block as well, although only on one measure. Aluminium is on the high side for this block, and you expect that when the soil is a little bit acid. So there's more aluminium coming through, and it's not being neutralised by other materials, and that's not great for the tree, but it's not at critical levels yet. And again, a lot of the other trace elements pretty much in the normal range. Finally, block 6, which is doing okay this year, and it's interesting to see the results that come back from that. The pH of block 6 has come up to 5.5, so again, it's moved by about 0.3 compared to its last test, and that's not bad. The short-term nitrogen is lowish, but the long-term nitrogen is on the high side, and so these are stats which Mark told me when he was discussing. He says, look, I just really ignore them, just so long as you can keep feeding nitrogen through the year, it won't get overly low. Phosphorus is fine, potassium is borderline on that sort of analysis. There's a fair bit of sulphur in the block as well for this block. And the only real thing lacking in any of those sort of minor elements is zinc. And zinc's something that you can apply at flowering time with a foliar spray. It only does require basic trace elements, but you'll get some things like zinc and magnesium in manure. So those are sorts of things that the manure can cure. So those are the soil test results. February is a very busy time of year for macadamia farmers. What we have to do, particularly here in the Northern Rivers of New South Wales, is prepare the ground surface for harvest while at the same time dodging the rains that typically come this time of year. We thought we were going to have a somewhat easier year with El Nino bringing supposedly more than dry conditions, but that didn't turn out to be the case. For January, for January, the Alstonville Plateau has an average of 174 millimetres of rain during the month. It got 195. Rosebank is a bit wetter. It normally has an average of 230 mils for the month, which is a lot of rain. We got 311. Where would I rather be? Well, I'd probably rather be on the Alstonville Plateau when there's rain stats like that. It's very good for the nuts. It helps finish them off and helps, that extra juiciness and ripeness in the nuts, but you can have too much of a good thing. Now, speaking of that, I'm down on the flats near the ocean. This is in between Knockrow and Lennox Head. This is an interesting, more recent farm. The trees here were planted with stakes. It was a fairly expensive operation. What you can see between each row is a drainage channel. So it's very neatly between each row. You can see there's mud in the row, and right near where I am by the side of the road, it's just soaking. Now, when you get ground conditions like that, you can't really prepare the ground for harvest, because whatever machine you drive on the soil is going to carve into the soil, make depressions, and that's not what you want. What you want is the flattest possible ground with the lowest possible grass clippings, and those two aims often conflict with each other, because to get the grass down you need to drive machines, and then the machines can dig themselves into the soil. So in particularly wet times, it's farms like these that do have a unique risk in that the soil isn't entirely red soil. It doesn't drain quite as well. And on the flats, of course, there's, the water has to be encouraged to go elsewhere. It doesn't naturally flow in one direction or another. So there's those extra costs, but sometimes there's extra benefits, because, certainly along long flat rows of macadamias like that, in good conditions, there'd be an absolute dream to look after. You just do these great big long rows as far as the eye can see, and there'd be quite efficient operations as far as farming goes. And so long as there isn't too much water, because the macadamias don't like wet feet. Anyway, in this particular time of month, we all try and be as busy as possible. Obviously, we can be a bit hamstrung by the weather, and the rest of it is just anticipation. And the anticipation about what price we're going to get paid for the crop this year. We can expect to get some news about that at the end of February, early March. And, I'm hearing everything from mild optimism to wild optimism. I'm not subscribing to the wild optimism. I'm going to wait and see. And as with previous years, I'm going to give you a guide as to the fine print that comes out with these price offers, because the fine print's going to be the killer this year, I think. And and we just wait and see, and hope that sort of this money that we're ploughing into our farms can be returned to us this year, in contrast to last year, where the prices were very poor indeed. But on a farm like this, I'd be guessing these trees are maybe 4 years old, possibly 5. They've got some nuts on them. You'd certainly think that if the price was right, they'd be very worthwhile coming along with a harvester and picking up what they can of these trees. So, good luck to the farmer here. He or she certainly does a very good job of maintaining the land. And I must say, I'm well behind on my own maintenance. We're down to slashing some of these rows as soon as it gets dry enough. But that's not a job for today, because I can feel the rain starting to come down even as I speak with you. And I'm going to leave you today with some vision that makes me kind of feel lucky that I'm a little bit higher up in the northern rivers, because I can actually see fish swimming in between the rows of these macadamia trees. Also down on the Newrybar Flats where I was coming from earlier. And this is not good. There's obviously a little bit too much ambition in the planting here. It's a matter of whether these trees can survive having what will be very wet feet. They don't look like they're suffering now, but if the wet weather keeps up, you'd imagine there'd be a fair bit of trouble keeping these blocks alive. And of course, any prospect of harvesting will really depend on the variety. Something where if you wanted to try planting these areas at all and take the risks that come, you would have very late bearing varieties that crop in winter, or even sort of late winter, so that you're not faced with issues like this come harvest time, and you're not having nuts plonk into the water and basically washing away. Anyway, guys, I hope that those were some interesting pictures to accompany a fairly dry update. I'd love to catch you again soon and talk to you then. Bye for now.